Standing Vitaly Friedman, and he's going to be talking about beautiful things and things that also might be irritating, as I understand from the title. Actually, only it's very
That's right.
descriptive. Frustrating design patterns in 2021 and how to fix them. So I honestly think everybody should hear about this.
Yeah. Thank you
Please,
so much.
some applause. It's normal to clap after
that's
somebody
kind.
introduces someone.
Thank
Say
you so much
hi.
for the wonderful introduction. Well, frustrating experiences. I hope you had some popcorn with you. You'll need it. I had a frustrating experience yesterday, just arriving to airport, and I bought the ticket with Trophy, and I forgot to activate them. That was a bad idea because I then got dragged out from the bus, and I had a very pleasant and frustrating experience. I guess where I have to pay a fee now. So that's me. Well, welcome to the session. This is not about me talking about the meaning of life, but about frustrating things that are all around us. And I don't know about you, but I feel like every now and again we are struggling with things that are kind of happening around us. And it's very often related to a very simple fact. A fact that when we're designing, when we're building, when we're doing pretty much anything at this point, we think that we are following a pretty much linear path where we start somewhere, right? And off we go, and actually we keep refining and improving until eventually we're hitting the finish point and we are done, right? In reality, though, we are bound by boundaries that we have to operate within. And that could be legacy, this could be anything, the experience that our colleagues have, pretty much all the things, be it finances, be it resources, and everything in between. So in the end, we cannot just go ahead and follow a linear path and come up with whatever we want to come up with. We're always forced to navigate within those tunnels, those boundaries. And that often means that we will be experiencing those dead ends. Those dead ends where we don't know how to proceed, because you might end up in a situation like this, right, where we just don't know how to proceed. You have to recover back and then move forward. And that takes time. However, we don't have time. Do you have time? Please talk to me. No, we don't have time. So what do? We rely on things that used to work in the past, right? Not because we're lazy, just because it would take infinitely more time to come up with something new and a perfect idea every now and again. So we end up in this world where everything looks like this, all like this. And the only difference sometimes is the position of a carousel, sometimes on the top, sometimes at the bottom, sometimes in both. And I asked myself, how did we come to the world in 2021 when this is perfectly acceptable? Isn't it weird? Why don't we go on the streets to protest against it like we usually do? Why don't we want to change it for good? I mean, would somebody consider this to be a great first experience? Somebody enters the site? I think that not, right? This is just a really, really bad experience. So how did we come there? And I'm like an elephant because I never forget. I will never forget this famous example. I know that many of you have a pleasure of flying with Ryanair. I have a thing against Ryanair because for a very long time they were doing this little trick where you could buy a ticket on Ryanair, but whenever you buy a ticket, an insurance is added in for you automatically unless you opt out. But to opt out, you need to find the opt-out option, which is conveniently located between Denmark and Finland in the country selector, right? That doesn't feel like a great usability for me, right? And then many of you might have noted this, right? Do you see anything weird going on here? If you want to boost your sales, or not really sales, kind of boost engagement and conversion, try to at least, well, you can just Photoshop in a hair on an Instagram ad, and yes, people will click. Right? And this is essentially what people were doing. Not great in the end, but this is working. Many of us also have seen these beauties. Right? Somebody just bought this, somebody just did that. Yes, they are all over us. It doesn't matter where you look, right? But the issue is, have you ever looked into the code, or maybe you were building one? Very often it's going to be a very tiny script somewhere that randomly combines first names, last names, product images, people's photos, dates, times, to convey a message like somebody is booking, which is basically just cheating, right? And again, all of this is just the state of things, but sometimes it gets much worse. It's just more frustrating, I would say. So if you look at this example, which I had to fill in when I was checking in for a flight, can you tell me what's wrong here? Or is it just a perfectly normal experience in 2021? So somebody's asking you for your date of birth, right? I guess, well, this is my assumption that most of you know your date of birth. Is that right? That's a pretty basic thing. So it took me 53 seconds with this example to fill in my date of birth, navigating through the adventures of months, years, decades, past history, reminding me of how really old I am, right? Thank you very much, dear interface. You know what would be maybe a little bit faster? Just giving me an input text box so I could fill in 8 numbers, because I know that, I guess, most of us are very much familiar with our birthday, right? So it's not needed to show a calendar to remind us, was it now Thursday or Friday? I don't remember anymore, right? That's just weird and confusing. The new beauty that I just discovered in so many pages recently is this, where you have to type in the time when you're departing in all these passenger locator forms. This is a date/time selector configurator picker, right? How are we feeling about this, everyone? If I tell you, I cannot say if it's a bad design or a good design because we don't know the context, right? But my assumption is it would probably be a bit faster, much faster in fact, to just give people an opportunity to write something in a text box instead of enforcing this kind of circular thing, right? And then, of course, there is this. I mean, we don't get that much anymore because we have an invisible capture going on, right? But we get this every morning. My life is, will I be correctly discovering fire hydrants, crosswalks, and traffic lights? And very often I fail. And then I start over again. It's like my entire life is figuring out what is a fire hydrant and what's not. This is not acceptable. This is not okay, right? So let's fix that. And I want to kind of look into something that people are experiencing and something that people really don't like and how we can fix that. Because just last year, I had this opportunity to do some research and figure out what people really don't like, you know, everybody like us, and what people appreciate and how we can resolve those issues for good. For example, people don't like these tiny scrollable panes. Remember, maybe filters or so, where you have a couple of brands, maybe hundreds of brands even, have to scroll very, very carefully to just get to the right one. Nobody likes that. The same goes for things like tiny click targets, where you have this newsletter checkbox, which is so tiny and so difficult to hit. Unexpected content shifts, menus that open on hours, so it doesn't give you kind of sense of control. We'll talk about it in a moment. Country selector drop-down, where you are navigating and exploring 289 countries which you might be residing from. And if you happen to be from the Netherlands, you're screwed over big time. Because it could be the Netherlands, Holland, you might be prioritized as one of the top countries on the top. Where do you search for yourself, right? And then you get, of course, all kinds of things like generic error messages, back button that's not supported, next button that's disabled, filters that freeze every time you select a filter, right, so the entire UI freezes, tooltips that cover user input. When we have sliders and they don't have any text fallback, draconian password requirements, so you're just requesting too much. So if somebody asks you to set up an account for something, right, and you're typing in your password, I mean, many of us are using password managers, but for simple accounts, many of us are reusing the same passwords every now and again. So if you're requesting a very specific, requirement, you have a very specific requirement for your password, what people tend to do is to use their baseline password and then add a couple of extra characters if needed, just to pass the gates. Who does that? Look at you, I know you too well, don't I? Inline validating, that doesn't work. Birthday picker, that started 2021. Why? Doesn't make sense. So let's take a look at all of those things, and of course, scrolljacking parallax and identifying buses and crosswalks. And I want to start with one that many of us hate, and I want you to fall in love with it, and that's carousels. Any fans of carousels? Online or offline? Please raise. I cannot see you, but it would be nice, right? A few fans of carousels. Who is taking a stand against carousels? Anybody? And everybody else is like, whatever, just bring it on, I eat popcorn. Okay, well, when we look into carousels, there is nothing wrong with a good, nice-looking carousel. Look at this carousel. In the back and in the front, it's beautiful. However, most of the time, it's maybe not as beautiful. This is a traditional pattern that we got used to, where we have essentially an arrow and dots in between, and another arrow, and that's it. That's pretty much the carousel pattern that we all know. However, if you study it around the world, you'll find out that the carousels around the world look very different. Here is one from Turkey, right? If you happen to be designing Turkish websites, you will not be using the same pattern. You don't have the dots that we have most of the time. You'll have numbers, a lot of numbers. And you will have more numbers if you click on Tümü, right? So you will have like 50 or 60 of them at a time. No dots in use, right? And then if you go further, this is all over the place. It's very, very hard to find dots, and it actually confused me. Why? Why is it done this way? And then I found this, which is a grand example of all carousels you ever wanted in one place. Right? So we have here at the bottom, let's see if I can show it. Can I? Right at the bottom here we have the horizontal one, and we have a vertical one. Then we have one with the thumbnails, and of course we have the content slider in the right upper corner as well, like 4 carousels for the size of one, for the price of one, I would say, right? That brought me to thinking. And so, what can we do to make things better? Now, when we look at this example, there was a study, and it wasn't, it was very obvious that many people, when we look into how many people actually click through the carousel, most people will not. This is the click-through rate for that particular pattern, on that particular website though. So what do we tell from this? Well, 85% of people noticed position 1 but never click through, and then we have 2 to 3% position 2, 3, 4, and 5. However, what's very interesting about this is, if you can drive somebody to position 2, it's like people have to drive the full circle. If you drive somebody to position 2, they will go to position 3, and they will go to position 4 and 5. Very often. Not always, but very often. Now, this is that particular case, but if you look into other industries, like let's say e-commerce, it's going to look very different. So if you think about product images, you think about websites that are selling you hotels, rooms in a hotel, right? Vacations, you will see very different click-through rate. Most of the time, it will be like this. There will be an exponential decay feed where the first slices are seen, right? And the later one maybe not so much. But if it's a vacation, people will be clicking through a lot. This is why, for example, many large booking websites have a lot of images for things like vacations, shopping, and so on and so forth, right? So you always have this exponential decay feed. They don't just disappear. They can be important and useful as well, which people are going to click through. However, there is this option, of course, that many of us are using, which is auto-advancing carousel. And sometimes it works, right? Sometimes it can be okay, especially if you have a lot of products that you desperately want to show, but usability-wise, it's a no-go. Accessibility-wise, you can still make it work fine by adding a pause button in the middle. So that's at least better than just auto-rotating by default and not even, being able to pause it. Otherwise, people just scroll by. Now, there is still more we can do, because if you think about the pattern that we have here, it's just a dot that doesn't really mean anything. So what if we added some meaning to it, like we do here? So we have carrier framework, knowledge base, reviews analytics. Ironically, the carousel's at the bottom of it, but you kind of get the idea, right? Here's another one where you have the labels at the bottom, and you also have hover, where you're showing the video of what we're expecting to see there, kind of a preview. That's infinitely more useful than just seeing a lifeless dot, right? It's more like a tab than in that case, but actually in its nature, it's kind of in the structure way, you can think about it as a carousel, right? And you would say, well, hold on, but what we're going to do on mobile? Well, you could pull off maybe doing something like this, or even tilt it by, 45 degrees, maybe allow people even to swipe through that carousel as well. That could also be an option. But again, replacing dots is probably a good first start, right, when it comes to interfaces like this. It doesn't have to be a label, it could also be a thumbnail. That's probably also much more useful than just having a dot that doesn't represent anything. But then comes the question about arrows. Where do you put the arrows, right? These are the questions that keep me awake at night. Anybody else bothers about those things? No, that's fair, that's fair. But where would you put these arrows, right, to navigate to the, oh, hold on, let's go back here, to navigate to the next portion of the carousel and the previous portion of the carousel? Where do we put it? There are 3 options, right? We can put it all the way in the right upper corner, in the middle of, like, vertically aligned, or at the bottom of the carousel. So let's have a vote. Who would put it on the top right corner? Or at the top? A few people, a few. What about the middle, right, kind of covering the image? All right, what about at the bottom? A few people. So what's the ultimate solution? Well, I have an idea, but maybe I'm wrong. And the idea is, well, it depends on what we want to do. Because if we look into how we use our mobile screens, where those things are going to appear as well, if we place this next arrow above the carousel, then you will have to lift your finger to read, potentially, depending on the size, of course, of your device, to read what is on that slice, right? However, if you put the same thing, partly can happen if you put it in the middle, because you can also tap accidentally into that image or into whatever the product you're highlighting. If you put it at the bottom, right, you can always keep tapping on the left and on the right and see the content without having to lift your finger ever, right? Which kind of solves all problems at once. And for me, personally, this particular case right here is an excellent example of what I would do all the time for any kind of carousel if I can. If we need to build a carousel or design a carousel, I'm definitely going to be with this pattern. So what do we have here? Two big buttons that are easy to click on the desktop. They're displayed above the area that we're seeing, right? However, as you keep going to the small screen, as you will see in a moment, they're kind of jumping under those images. Let me just jump back here so you can see it a bit better. Right, so as we keep going down, right, we see that these arrows are exactly where they need to be. They are below those images. But again, beyond that, do you need those dots altogether? Maybe we can show a preview of something that's a bit more contextual. And it can be funny and nice as well. So here's a very nice example of this in action too, where you kind of integrate the arrows within that carousel, but also show the slices and the kind of moving. And there is this area on the left that's dedicated to testimonials and reviews or whatever you want to show there. That's perfect. That actually works exactly as it should be. Right? In that regard, it actually makes perfect sense. But you can also go much further than that. This is a very unusual one, but why not something like this? This is a bookshelf kind of experience, and as you go through the carousel, the shelf is changing and kind of the new book appears. Here is the best website on the planet. This is a Polish puppet theater website. The best website on the planet. They always interact with this idea of puppets hanging from the sky somewhere, and you can move them around. And of course, it's a great metaphor for kind of carousels as well. So that works really, really well. That's beautiful, right? If you look at that, you can also do much more, because if you can say, well, I cannot put too much information in those cards or labels at the bottom. Why not make them swipeable, right? Oops, sorry. Let me just remove the audio, so it is going to be probably a little bit too loud. All right, let me remove audio volume. Here we go. Right? Why not have something like this, where you actually can swipe through the different parts of the image? This is a very nice application called V for exploring the city where you happen to be. And so they have these connections. Like if you think about the map and the cards that we need to display together. So as you move, these connections are moving as well, right? It looks very nice, and you can actually make people swipe through all those cards. Even if you have to display so many, you can still make it work, right? That looks pretty fine as well. However, if you're working in an enterprise or corporate environment, you probably cannot pull that off. So what worked really best for Amazon, for example, is again to replacing these dots with something that's a bit more contextual. In this particular case, kind of turning it into some sort of a tab bar, if you like, where you have thumbnails and you have some context in there as well. And on mobile, that's kind of funny as well. They decided to remove the dots altogether and indicate that there is something else in there with this movement. But of course, you can also just show a slice of what's happening there as well. I think this is also something that, for example, Walt is using. Right? So there are plenty of examples of how we can get things done really well, including, if you want to, go ahead and make an auto-rotating full screen circular carousel. Why not? Circular carousels are fine, right? And in fact, there are plenty of things that we could do there. So I have a checklist. If you want to take a snapshot of that, feel free to do so. I will also send a slide with all the things to the organizers, of course. But these are all the questions I keep asking myself when it comes to designing a carousel. And as a guideline, if we need to design one, we need to be very careful about how we're choosing the sequence of slices, because technically, most of the time, the first slices that are coming in that list will be getting most attention. They should not rotate too quickly. Actually, it's a good idea to have 5 to 7 seconds pause between every rotation. Otherwise, people start dismissing or ignoring those slices of the carousel altogether. Obviously, the carousel should pause auto-rotation on hover and entirely stop on interaction whenever you're planning on focusing on a button, let's say. If you can, try to avoid auto-rotation on mobile, but if you have to do it, you need to include the pause button We need to support swipe gestures. Also a good idea to show a slice of the following slide. Sometimes you have the situations where the arrow is not is kind of transparent, so it lives on top of an image, so it's not visible. We need to avoid that as well. And it works really well as an image gallery and also on product pages. So please go ahead. If you need to design a carousel, this is going to make a great experience. Did I make you fall in love with carousel? Anybody? No. Disappointing. Let's keep going, right? Because I have another thing, disabled buttons. Anybody likes a good disabled button? Oh, we have the same person who likes carousels. That makes me worried a little bit. All right. Anybody who is not a big fan of disabled buttons? 50-50. Let's have a fight. Well, disabled buttons, well, they are actually quite everywhere. Doesn't matter where we look, and there is a good reason. Why do we use them? Because we don't want to submit any incorrect data. So if you have a complicated form like this, we want to enable that grayed out button at the bottom right, so it becomes enabled once we've filled in the form entirely, right? That's kind of the reason for it. And of course, we're talking about disabled buttons, but sometimes we have disabled interfaces. So imagine you're clicking on a filter somewhere and the entire interface freezes, and then it comes back to life when what? Well, when something came back from the server, right? Sometimes you don't have to do that because you can decouple the navigation you have or the filters that you're assigning from the list view. That's already better. And sometimes you just don't have the data, so you don't really disabling, but you just don't have the data, so you can't show it all. And obviously, when it comes to really, important transactions, you're sending money to somebody, you don't want to send the money twice, right? So it definitely makes sense to disable, right? So I decided to study how people perceive disabled state, and particularly disabled state of the interface altogether and of buttons. Now, in general, it's kind of obvious that disabled state signifies that something is wrong. But specifically with disabled buttons, people feel like something is not wrong with their system overall, but with their input. That's great. That's exactly what we want, right? So when only a button is disabled, they understand that something is wrong with their input, not with the entire interface or anything like that. Not connection either. So it's just something related to their input. All right, so if we look at this example then, this is a system from Sweden where you can buy tickets to go from A to B, and the same story, the button is disabled, and if you choose one of the options, it becomes enabled, right? Nothing groundbreaking. So what happens actually when somebody encounters this? So you are on the first time on this website, what actually happens? When people encounter this, the first thing that they do is slowing down massively. It's like hitting the wall. If they want to proceed, but for some reason the button is disabled, they just stopping everything, right? Then they search for error messages. If they don't find anything, then they look for usual suspects. Maybe it's formatting, maybe it's accent characters, maybe it's the empty spaces that they have, all the things that we are probably used to, right? If it doesn't work either, they start scanning the entire form up, field by field by field, and if they cannot resolve the issue, they leave. Not very surprising. If you cannot proceed, you're going to leave. Here's an example of that. So here's WeTransfer, a service I use a lot. I absolutely love WeTransfer. But for some reason, I don't know why, the button is disabled. So it is disabled. There is no way for me to proceed. I'm fully locked out. And this, my friends, is a very expensive thing for businesses. And most of the time, it's not even measured. Disabled buttons can be extremely expensive because you will have some people, and it's a very good idea to know how many people, totally locked out. You guarantee 100% abandonment in a case when they encounter a disabled button and cannot recover from it. Now, it could be just, I don't know, one person in a month. It could be, as it was in my case, with an insurance company that I was working with 4.8% of people coming to the site and trying to configure their own quote. That's very expensive, right? That's significant. That's really expensive. So what can I do here? The only thing I can do is leave, right? And there is a problem with disabled buttons, and the problem is they don't explain what's wrong. Sometimes you might be left wondering, what exactly do you need to do? What is missing? They're also not focusable by default, and they're also hard to read, as they're usually grayed out, as we saw in the previous example, right? With enabled buttons, we at least have a chance to highlight what exactly is the problem. Now, that's not to mention that we should always avoid them. Sometimes it's a good idea to keep them, for example, when transactions, right? It's fine, because once you clicked on the button, if we want to signify somehow that something is processing, right? And also, obviously, we need to stop listening to click event just in case somebody clicks twice, right? And also when something is not available, let's say, we might want to highlight it in some way as well. But we also can make disabled buttons, if we need to keep them, more useful. For example, when we look into something like this, right? Wouldn't it be better to at least show a highlight or tooltip of what exactly is the problem then? Why it is disabled, right? And even better than that, because we can make it accessible for the screen readers. If something is disabled, it's not focusable, so screen readers cannot even get to that button. So what if we did this?
Level 1. Inclusive disabled buttons. Middle top demo 3/3. Disabled button using ARIA disabled attributes and tooltip. Number of tickets. Required invalid data. Edit text 0. Add to cart. GIMP button. Add between 1 and 9 tickets.
Right. So if you are poor in sight, or you are using the keyboard only, right, you at least are able, you're able at least to actually understand what is going on, how to fix that, right? That's already much better, right? And also another thing you can do, of course, is to just show an error message on click. So keep the buttons enabled at all times, and then show error messages, when you know what the error message is. In fact, it can be integrated in all kinds of forms, even like this, where you have a little popover, maybe showing up above the button, to indicate what the problem is and drive people to the field where the issue is, right? But you can do more. This is the thing that we tried, and it worked remarkably well. And I wished more sites had this. So again, coming back to this scenario where we have a disabled button and then becomes enabled, what if we cannot change the behavior of the disabled buttons? It's just, we have a legacy system, they are disabled. We can't just change the system altogether. Going to take too much time. So what if we add some sort of a hint at the bottom? Just a simple hard-coded link, basically. Can proceed, choose a journey first. And it drives you to whatever is critical most of the time, which would be, for example, the selection of the ticket to proceed, right? We could also, of course, then highlight all the other errors as well. Or we could do something else. Imagine a complex form where you have maybe an enterprise where you have to fill in something that's a very complex process, which has maybe 20 pages long or so. Well, if people are blocked out for some reason, maybe you can allow them to store all the content that they have typed in. Right? So when they click on let us know here, you show a pop-up saying, okay, your data is safe, it's going to be sent to the customer service. The only thing that we need is your email to be able to get back to you, right? Once we resolve the issue for whatever reasons. So some poor person who has spent, 20 minutes filling a 20 pages form will never lose their data. I mean, in general, it's a good idea, of course, to have a save button instead. But if you cannot do that, that's a nice way of getting out of this. Right? And another thing that I challenge you to try, and it's an interesting one, why don't we allow people to proceed despite errors, like this? And again, this is something that you don't see much, and there are reasons for it, right? Because we don't want to compromise the integrity of our backend system, right? But we need to measure. This is my task most of the time. When I'm hired to do jobs, right, most of the time it's, do we have anything that we're missing? And very often this will be one of them, right? Because if you don't know, for example, if you see that there are some scenarios where people are locked out, you need to understand why it happens. Who had a situation at some point where you're asked to type in your shipping address to deliver something or pick up something, and the validator tells you, no, you're wrong. Anybody had this experience? Oh, so many. So what can you do? If you cannot deliver an item to yourself, maybe you will deliver it to somewhere else, but maybe if it's something like food, right? You don't want to hunt to a neighbor, to kind of race to a neighbor to pick it up, right? So there will be some percentage of people who will always be locked out. So if you're living in this particular address for a long time, and the interface tells you, no, you're not, well, then I guess the interface is wrong, right? But it's not like you can go on and say, interface, you're wrong, I'm right. You cannot do that. So why don't we allow people to do that? And say, oh, well, there seem to be errors in your input pointing to those errors, right? But if you're sure, please proceed. And then we measure. We measure two things. We measure on the one hand what happened before, how many people we missed out on, right? And we measure how many people we then gained as a result of this. And also, additionally, we could measure how many additional costs we get due to incorrect data in our backend. And sometimes it might not be worth it. I get that. But sometimes it might be 4.8% of customers that you're going to pick up this way, right? That's quite significant. That's not something that needs to be, that we should be kind of ignoring, right? So when you think about those things, you can make disabled buttons more helpful, but that's a lot of work. Right? That's a lot of work. You have to work with area. You have to ensure that you have focus trapping mode as well. So when people keep using the keyboard, you're tapping into the model and then you're tapping out of the model. You have to track the escape and all those things, right? Seems like a lot of work for things that you can just avoid altogether if you keep buttons enabled all the time. And I'm all for doing less work, if I'm being honest. I have no idea how much time I have, but I'm just going to keep going. So, anybody fall in love with not disabling buttons? Okay, a few more. Okay, we have one more. Now, normally, when we think about those things again, and again, when we look into these frustrations, those things are the ones that are really hurting both the customer and the business, and that's very important. But we usually think, well, hold on, isn't that like a big deal? Like all these disabled buttons, inline validation takes care of that, right? Shouldn't inline validation take care of that? Well, here is a story. How many of you experienced something like this in the past? The validation is too eager or too early, and in both times, just too frustrating. So you type in an incorrect email, you realize that, you come back and you're penalized again. You didn't even have a chance to type in a character, and you're being penalized again. Anybody had this before? No, what a pleasant experience that is, right? You didn't even do anything and they tell you you're wrong. That's not fair. I'm not wrong. I just didn't have a chance to fix things properly, right? So there are 3 types of inline validation, normally, right? Premature validation, where we're validating when somebody just hits the input, right? Which is way too early, right, most of the time. And then sometimes you get this real-time validation, which is called immediate validation. As you're typing, it tells you, you're wrong, oh, you're right, you're wrong, you're right, you're wrong, you're right. That's annoying and not very helpful either. And then you have late validation, where we're validating on blur or when somebody leaves the field. And it has become a consensus in the UX world, at least, that we're validating, of course, late, because the other options are just too annoying and frustrating. But all of them, in reality, interrupt either too early or too late, right? Inline validation can be really difficult to get right. There is a way, though, because then if you want to get it right, you need to work on that. Because for every input, you need to define a minimum threshold of characters when you start validating. Then you validate only if that threshold is reached for every single input. If there is an error, you show it immediately as you detect it. So if you have, let's say, 2 add characters in an email, you show success only if the user has moved to the next field, right? So late validation. But whenever somebody edits a field that was valid, right? We want to validate after data entry, meaning after they left the input field, right? And whenever they edit a field that was invalid, we validate immediately. So in other words, we reward early, right? So if they fix a mistake, we reward right away. And if they just edit something that was valid already, we punish them later once they move to the next field. And that needs to be done on every component level, whichever is required or needs to be inline validated, right? And this is a lot of work. It really is. Because you will have situations where inline validation will fail. These are just a few that I discovered over the last couple of months, where you have too aggressive validators for address, phone number, or email. Some services require non-Gmail email address, but you maybe don't have a company yet. You have situations where you have non-standardized phone numbers, extension numbers, non-standardized TIN or VAT text numbers. You also have situations where extensions in browser blocking a part of the UI, right? So, and you are expected to type in something in there, and it's not going to work. You have all kinds of situations with different countries, which have very different country-specific inputs that might be required, or the way of formatting that might be required. And also we need to measure, just in general, what impact all of that has on business again. Inline validation, just like disabled buttons, can be very, very expensive too. So what do we do then? Well, what if we actually just didn't do inline validation? Just as a challenge. I'm not saying it's always going to work, right? But why don't we do it the other way around? Why don't we actually validate on submit only and measure what impact it's going to have on our business, right? Just as just an alternative. Because it might be, again, that there is a big significant business difference, business costs and business profit difference in terms of when we are validating and how we're validating. That also avoids all the issues. We don't have to work with inline validation and figure out when exactly to validate and how, right? So people click on submit button, we show that there are errors, right? Why don't we do it this way? Maybe that would even be better. right? I just don't have the slides for it for some reason. I just deleted them just before this. That's very bad. But in general, right, when you think about it, you click on the register button and you show the errors, the error fields, the areas which have mistakes, in only then. The rest, simple, you don't do anything. And I just want to challenge you to try that and see if it's going to bring you any benefits or not. Anybody agrees? One person, Akil agrees. That makes me very, very happy. Okay, ready for one more? Yes, excellent. All right, let's talk about my favorite one. I really don't know how much time I have. Mega drop-downs. Hover menus. Anybody likes them? Oh, that's quite clear. Anybody doesn't like them? Why? Aren't they showing us options when we need them? Think about something like this, a very complex interface where you have not complex, complicated, where you have a lot of stuff, you have a lot of navigation options, and all of this has to be shown somehow. Like, isn't Mega Dropdown supposed to solve just that problem? That's ideal, right? Well, not so much, because we have hover tunnels. Anybody experienced this before? You just need to drag in and dive into the tunnel, and this tunnel is very, very small, and you have to be very, very accurate, and as you go from one to another, eventually on level 4 you're lost and you have to restart over again. That's no fun, right? But then there are other things like this. This is a website I use every day, and I hate using it every day. Because whenever you are putting any kind of mega dropdown next to something else, mostly the search box, that is going to be positioned above it, you have this flickering all over, right? And this is very frustrating and very annoying. And I know what you're thinking, but didn't we, invent something like delays, right? So you have hover delays for that? Sure, but then we have another problem. This is the one. So you have this thing where things are delayed, indeed, to kind of register intent. So if you really want to open a mega menu, then you need to wait a little bit, like 300 milliseconds, maybe 400 milliseconds. But then you have this where it just doesn't show up quick enough, right? Or it just bothers you all the time because you always need to wait to go to the third level. And you are at the moment on level 3 on the sub page, but you always have to open from top to bottom and navigate through this tunnel, right? And you could say, hold on, didn't we invent something else to solve this? Like, anybody heard of this triangle, Amazon's triangle technique for this problem? And some of you maybe have implemented it as well. And the idea is, well, let's just figure out where people are when they're navigating, right? And so as long as they're within this triangle, we're going to show that section. And if they're not, because they kind of moved away from it, then we're kind of showing the next, right? But that assumes a particular way of people moving around our UI, and it's not necessarily the case. And what do we do with people who are using keyboard only? And also, what do we do with people on mobile, right? Well, even this is not good enough anymore. If you do want to target specifically desktop and you kind of find that this is probably one of the better approaches out there, you have to be a bit more careful, right? Because it is very common to see situations like this, where you actually calculate not just the triangle, but you calculate kind of an overlay almost, because it needs to be responsive too. Right? You can't just say, I'm going to calculate triangle, because sometimes you might be hitting other buttons or other links that you want people to be able to reach as well, right? So what you need to do then, for every state, for whatever view you have, for the viewport that you have, you need to make sure that this blob that you see here, right, is always stays. So whenever, as long as you're within that one, well, then you need to show that dropdown. And the way we do this in JavaScript would be something like this. Right, where we're calculating within SVG how we're going. This is kind of the SVG overlay technique, right? We calculate just the right area that we need to keep for people to be able to see that section. Now, here's a question, a tricky question from me to you, right? Why do we have this weird shape? Why do we excluding this area in the very middle, the gray one? Right? Why? Anybody? Any guesses? That's difficult to guess. Well, because you might have some separation between the label that drives you to the category and an icon that opens that drop-down, for example. Or you might have even something else. You might have two buttons on the same spot, which are actually driving to separate pages. But as long as you are within that area, right, you still want to be able to show this drop-down potentially. Right, so it causes a lot of troubles that you kind of need to work through. Mega drop-downs, And then, of course, related to this is something else. This is the Royal Institution, RI, and in here we have just a regular navigation, nothing weird going on here. But then as we go to mobile, as we go to mobile, right here, let me just jump a little bit at the bottom, right? As we go to the mobile view, I'm so bad at hitting those targets. Really bad. Let me try again. Cheer with me. Yes, I made it, right? So as we are here on the menu, let's see what happens. Let's see if you understand where you are when you're using it. These sliding overlays, they are also very expensive for businesses because they're also, by the way, the slowest in interaction when it comes to accessing a particular piece of navigation or a particular piece of the site, right? Now, you might have not spotted it, but there is a lot of confusion going on. What is the problem? Anybody notice what the problem is? It might be difficult to get it right. Whenever I have a problem like this, I always do two things. The first thing is I'm going frame by frame to understand where the person clicked or where they didn't click. So that means I open the menu, all right, this thing shows up from top to bottom. It's not an overlay, it kind of opens up and slides in. And then I keep going and I'm clicking now on families. Now what do I expect? To see something about families, right? So I click on families and I get to see this. Now we understand the difference between families here and families there, right? What will happen here when you click on families? Well, you go to the category, right? That's what we should be expecting, right? Oh, but hold on, there is an icon showing up on the right. So what does it mean? So if I click now on Family Fun Days because it's fun and it's family, so what should happen? Should you go to the page or should it open another section? Who would say it goes to the page? Who would say it opens another section? All right, let's try Family Fun Days. Right, that's exactly what we were expecting. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so now we are back on the page, whatever page that is, and then we click on the menu and we go into education. We understand the difference between the first education and this education. So what should we expect when we click on master classes now? Who expects a new page? Who expects a new section, subsection? All right, let's click on master classes, shall we? All right, so what should happen now if you click on organizers page? Who expects a new page now? Who expects a new subsection? All right, let's keep going. Right, so what about now when you click on news? Does anybody know anymore? I mean, I don't know, I have no idea, right? So you click on news, despite the icon, you go to the page, right? So all this is just, we can play a little bit with contrast and this and that, it's quite obvious, but I would highly discourage you and again challenge you to replace this kind of sliding navigation if you can, because I know that sometimes you have a legacy site that has a lot of levels, but think about replacing it with something else. What could it be? It could be as simple as, hold on, let me just double check. This still has a slider overlay, but it actually has a little bit of contrast, right? But I would encourage you to try something else. Namely something like this, where you might have, if you absolutely need to, you might have this sliding in experience on one level, but then whenever you're showing some subsections, you change the experience that people are going to get. It's never just sliding, sliding, sliding until you're done. You're sliding until a section where you're going to drive people to pages, right? And only then you actually understand that, oh, okay, this is a different thing. But you can also do it even better. And for me, the perfect example, I guess, this is the last one on the right. But even here we see, if you just add a bit of contrast, it actually just makes more sense and you understand where you are. Sometimes you add these numbers to indicate how many subsections are expected there, right? And sometimes you just change the styling altogether, like the New England Journal of Medicine, navigation, and then you have the other level. Again, unlike with accordions, right? It's a different way of doing the same thing. It just looks different. That will already avoid all kind of confusion, right? And this is probably the best example I can, because I'm really a big fan of accordions. So if you don't like accordions, please don't come to me after break, right? I'm a big fan of accordions, and this is great for so many reasons. When I look at this pattern, which should be, I think, a default at this point, right? When you open any of the sections, right, you have incredible thing which you do not get with the other layered approach. With the layers, you always have to go back in order to move forward, right? Or you always have to go back a couple of steps in order to move forward, right? Here, you see multiple levels at the same time, right? You can jump between different levels very quickly, and between different siblings of the same category very quickly as well. So all the things literally solved. In general, though, this is really my reference example for anything. In general, though, I would say, maybe if we're designing today in 2021, why don't we just keep, oops, it's not playing. Why don't we just keep all of those fields and things that we're going to show up available only on tap, on click. This is probably not going to work if you have a very content-heavy website with a lot of navigation going on. But in general, for most websites out there, I would say it's perfectly fine. You keep it available whenever people want to open it, they click or tap, and they do. This is obviously also great for mobile. If they can't do that, if you can't do that, well, then maybe you could still indicate that there are some things with an accordion or so, and then highlight that these things are going to open. But in general, I would say mega hover menus cause more damage than help. So I challenge you again to test if anything happens at all if you replace the hover menu with a tap or click menu. Chances are high that actually, if anything, it's going to get better. And that's my, again, favorite example of this, where you get essentially just links that, well, they look like links. You could have a drop-down or chevron icon next to them, I guess. But you tap and things appear, and they do not disappear, right, as long as you don't choose to close it, right? So that makes perfect sense. Why not actually keep it this way? So, as a summary, right, just consider displaying this navigation on tap, click, not on hover. Hover delays and transitions especially can be very frustrating. Whenever it comes to hover menu, please don't put it below the search box. That's really, really bad. If needed, you can introduce this exit path areas if you absolutely need a mega hover menu, right? Also, when it comes to mega dropdown, we always need to support keyboard navigation. Sometimes it's a good idea to keep a sticky navigation on the top, on the left, on the right, the sidebar. It's very useful. It's very, very useful. So please do that. On mobile, if you can avoid multi-layered approach where people are kind of moving back and forth, that would be great too. And in general, accordions always work. If you don't know what to do, just try accordions. Chances are high that it's going to work just fine, right? So that's me freaking out about accordions because I like them so much. All right, can you tell me just how much time I have left? Oh, excellent. That gives me not much time, but I'm going to leave with one final thing. Just one more final thing. Please, I'm really just not trying to be difficult, right? Please avoid tooltips. Please avoid tooltips. And you're thinking, what the hell is going on now? Tooltips have so many issues. I wish we didn't have them at all. Why, you might say? Well, because of this. This is a very frustrating experience because you cannot read the tooltip and type in or correct or fix a mistake at the same time. And you can do whatever you want with your design. It's still going to be a problem because the tooltip needs to be positioned next to the label, right? So very often you get this. So what do we do? Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be difficult. Please try to stick to this. And I'm not going to mention floating labels because it's going to start wars, right? So you could say, well, okay, we could show a hint above the input box. Probably not going to work very well with floating label though, right? So what do we do then if we need to display a hint? Let's say a lengthy hint. We could do this, right? It could be a link. Whenever you click on it, it expands and you get to see, well, whatever you want to see. And so this is what it would look like, right? You still get the hint, it's perfectly fully keyboard accessible. You don't have any situations because tooltip in the end is like a model. So again, focus trapping, you need to think about the escape key and all those things. Why do more work if you can do less work, right? So we could probably get away with this. So tooltips, probably overrated and pretty much unnecessary most of the time. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now, I promise. We looked into some things that people didn't like. I also know that there are certain things that people actually like. And what do they like? Well, I like where things are fast and accessible, where you have a large and legible text, at least 16 pixels, maybe even 17 pixels for typing, large checkboxes and radio buttons, input boxes that look like input boxes. Don't get me started with material design, right? Focus on active states where you understand that you are within an input field and you're working on it. Password requirements that are simple enough, typing that's predictable, error messages that are helpful, good autocomplete. Whenever you hit refresh, the data should be persisted. Whenever you open a menu on tab on click, whenever you have easy undos, edits and cancellations, and also a back button. By the way, there is this phenomenon that happens. People are scared to death of the back button. Why do people are afraid of the back button? Anybody had this thing, like you may be falling asleep and you have this horrors about the back button? Anybody? That's not common. I think some people. Back buttons are very scary to people for a simple reason, because they're afraid of losing data. So if you assume that many people will be clicking on the back button to go back, think again. You always need to include a back link on the top or your custom UI back link or back button, because this gives them a promise that they're going to go to the right page. Otherwise, you might be in a shopping checkout, you click on the back button, all your input is gone. Right? People are really afraid of the back button. And also they're afraid of the refresh button. So we need to keep the data safe. Snoozing notifications if there are too many. Pausing subscriptions, sometimes you either subscribed or you are cancelled, but you might be in a situation in between. And also things like transparent pricing. People really, really appreciate it. So what can we do? We can make better experiences as a result. It doesn't have to be boring. Do I like pop-ups? I love pop-ups. This is the best pop-up I've seen in my life. I wish every single website had this pop-up. It's so annoying, it's so frustrating, it's so confusing, it's so difficult to close. I love it. I absolutely love it. I wish it was on every single website out there. Why not? Or maybe something like this, where you're being asked for your date of birth with 3 single inputs, right? You can type in 32nd day of 43rd month and 1547, and you enter the site because they know that you're going to lie anyway. Right? Or if are you 21 or not? Right? Make it an experience for people. If you are, well, you just enter the site. But if you're not, let's ask some questions. So are you at least 18? Maybe 17? 16. Right? It just keeps going. You choose your own adventure kind of thing, right? And then it kind of keeps going and going and going. And eventually you get to the point where you just cannot click yes anymore. This is it. You're locked out, really. Right? And it's really easy to do. It's not like we need to invent something entirely different. You're using the pop-ups and you make them funny. Right? You can do that as well. So you can get your own story. Or here's one more. Very often in the forums you have to type in the title, Mr., Miss, Mrs., and things like that. Well, why don't we turn it upside down? Who would you like to be today? Would you like to be a Commodore today? Or maybe princess or professor? And it's a very long list. It has 58 options for you to choose from, right? You can choose your own adventure if you like as well, right? And in fact, you can just keep going and just, I think that many of you have seen this before. So as you're typing, this character responds to whatever it is that you're typing, right? And it makes people wait and slow down and actually have an emotional connection maybe with that interface. So as you keep typing, you really just want to keep going because it's just so much fun, right? But they're also very respectful, so they do not peek unless you tell them to, right? It's just perfect. I wish actually really more websites were like this. And the same goes for things like this, right? It can go a long way, just make people wait every now and again. There is nothing wrong in waiting as long as it's considerate, right? You don't need to wait like a minute. But you just make people wait a little bit. And this, by the way, needs to be every single subscription checkbox out there. Every single one of them needs to be like this. So make people tap twice, or 3 times, or 4 times to really make them subscribe to your newsletter. Not just, subscribe to my newsletter, opted in. Just make them work hard to get subscribed, right? They will be maybe clicking 10 times, and only on the 12th time, they'll be getting a subscription notification, right? That will make them remember you, and that's, again, a very simple thing that you can actually do sometimes. I get that sometimes you cannot do that in a corporate setting, but, you can do it sometimes. So all of this just to leave you with one final video, which is 50 seconds long, and then I'm done, which is literally the story of my life. Things are frustrating and not satisfying, but we can make them better just by thinking a little bit more about challenging the status quo that we get most of the time today. So this is the story of my life, and I hope that your lives as well, we can make things better. We just need to be a little bit clever every now and again. That's not fair. Life is not fair, right? So this is huge thanks to Parallel Studio for the wonderful video, right? This is our life, right? So with this in mind, I have some cats and more cats and meow, and thank you so much for listening. I hope it was useful for you.
Thank you very much. You are 16 minutes. 16 minutes over your time. So
I'm
no
sorry.
questions for you.
No
Please
questions
leave.
for me. All right, but I need my laptop.
Nope.